I left home at 17, not in the way that people romanticize the brave young woman striking out on her own. It wasn't like that for me. It was a necessity, it was survival. And when you're 17 and you're surviving, you do things you wouldn't do if you had more options, if you had more safety, if you had more people around you who could catch you. And I did things in those years that I probably have some regrets around. Nothing dramatic enough to make a good confession, but real enough that I carried them for a long time. And the particular quality of that carrying, I think you might know it. It's not something massive or big in my life, but it's not constant, but it's just there and it kind of resurfaces at odd moments. Sometimes it resurfaces when things are good or when I'm happy, or all of a sudden that kind of memory will come back and I'll have that kind of feeling inside myself, And I want to talk about that today. Not because I have it perfectly resolved, but I've come a long way. But I think the path through self-forgiveness is almost nothing like what we're told it is. So the thing I eventually understood about that 17-year-old aspect of me is this. She was doing her best. And I know that sounds simple. It sounds like the kind of thing you would say to yourself to make yourself feel better. But I really mean it precisely. She was doing her best with the resources that she had, in the circumstances that she was in, with the emotional tools available to her at that age, in that situation. And for a long time, I couldn't give my 17-year-old self that. I kept judging her from where I was standing. But with everything I've learned, with everything I've built, with the clarity that comes from years of distance, things have shifted, because I used to hold her almost at a standard that it wasn't possible for her to meet, And when you think about that, there's a little bit of cruelty in that. And what shifted for me wasn't a single moment. It was more like this gradual softening, a little bit of grief before I was able to forgive her. Because I think you have to grieve the version of yourself that had to make those choices before you can forgive her. You have to actually feel sad about what she went through, about why she had to do what she did, before that forgiveness has anywhere that it can land in. So the grief came first, and then the compassion followed. So here's something that I've noticed with working with people over the years. The ones who struggle most with self-forgiveness aren't the ones who don't care. They're the ones actually who care deeply. And the guilt that they experience is actually evidence of values that they're holding themselves to. And I often say to them, you wouldn't be carrying this if it didn't matter to you. The fact that it matters to you says something good about who you are. Right? You see, we reconstruct the past. And once we know how something ends, what happens is that we can barely remember not knowing how something ends. So we look back at a situation and we wonder, how could I have been so blind? But we weren't blind. We were just there in it, without the ending yet, without the knowledge that we have now. And that's true of every decision you've ever made that you regret. You made it as the person you were then, not the person you've become since. And the person you were then was navigating their life with limited information, with limited resources, and whatever was pressing down on you at the time. And this isn't an excuse. I want to be clear about that. We can hold what we did with honesty. Yeah, that happened. It affected someone. I wish I'd done it differently. And we can still extend the same basic compassion to our past selves that we'd extend to anyone else we knew who had been in that situation. So the version of self-forgiveness that most of us default to is really just self-punishment with a deadline. So we think, if I feel bad enough for long enough, eventually I will have earned the right to let it go, right? And so the guilt becomes almost a kind of penance. I was brought up Catholic, so I know all about this. And we keep paying it year after year, sometimes decades after anyone else would have said, hey, listen, that debt is settled. I love the work of Kristen Neff. She works at the University of Texas, and she's spent years studying self-compassion. And what she found is really interesting, and it consistently surprises people. Self-criticism doesn't make us better. It makes us more likely to repeat the behaviors we're ashamed of. Isn't that fascinating? It also makes us less likely to take real responsibility because we're less capable of actual change. So the internal judge we keep appointed to keep us in line is actually the thing that keeps us stuck. So real accountability, the kind that leads somewhere, comes from being able to look clearly at what happened, understand it, feel the weight of it, and then decide who you want to be going forward. It doesn't work to keep that wound open indefinitely like we do. And there's one more thing I want to say about this, and it's the one thing I wish someone had said to me when I was younger. The grief is part of it. So if you've been skipping straight to the self-criticism and missing the grief, you might have been doing this the wrong way round. So before forgiveness, there has to be some tenderness for the person that you were, even if it was the person you were yesterday. Some acknowledgement of what she was carrying, some sadness maybe about why she had to make the choices she made. That's not weakness, that's the actual path. So, this week, if you want to do it, I want to give you a little thing to try. Write a letter, just for yourself, no one else is to see it, to the version of you who did the thing you haven't forgiven yourself for. Not to excuse her, just to describe what she was dealing with at the time, what she didn't have, what she was up against. Tell her story just once with some compassion and see what happens. All right? If you're curious about where your happiness is, go to the description, do the happiness quiz. So the grief comes before the forgiveness. Let yourself feel sad for who you had to be before you can make peace with it. Hope this was helpful. As always, be kind, take care, go gently in the world.